Like Ted Cruz tweeting, "Who mixed the new Corey Taylor single? That snare sounds like." Or Kamala Harris making a 29-minute webcam rant about how gent is not a valid subgenre. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we're here to answer a few simple but actually difficult questions. Should musicians talk about politics in their music? What about social media? Or to take things even further, do they have an obligation to talk about politics to use their platform? My personal take is that musicians, or really anybody, should absolutely voice their opinion about whatever they want. But at the same time, we, as the audience, should probably take their opinions with a very big grain of salt. Like, if Dave Mustaine wants to tell me how to play guitar, I'm listening. The dude is amazing. But if he wants to tell us how to run the healthcare system, he's probably not the guy we should be listening to. But I also think it's not quite as simple as shut up and stick to music, because the truth is that musicians and other entertainers have helped to drive awareness of some genuinely important issues. So what's the verdict? Should musicians talk about politics, or should they just shut up and play their guitars? Or is the answer maybe not quite as simple as either one of those things? But first, I wanted to mention the Punk Rock MBA podcast. This show is really all about doing what you love for a living. And so every week I sit down with people who have done exactly that. For example, musicians like Matt from Periphery, Tommy from Between the Buried and Me, Low Lotus, Shinigami. I also talk to photographers, designers, YouTubers like Glenn Fricker and Sarah Dici. And what I try to do is unpack exactly how they got to where they are, with the goal of helping you do the same. You can check that out at the link in the description. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. All right, so some of you are probably saying, what a stupid question. Like, music and art have always gone hand in hand with politics and social issues. How could you even ask this? And they're right, and I'm sure it goes back way farther than these, but just as a couple examples from a long time ago that seem like shockingly contemporary, actually. This Woody Guthrie song from the 40s called "All You Fascists Bound to Lose."
Well, I'm gonna tell you fascists, you may be surprised.
And then all the protest music of the 60s, punk in the 70s and 80s, then rap in the 80s and 90s, as just like a very brief overview. Of course, it goes way deeper than that, but the point is that music has always been a vehicle for expressing opinions about politics and social issues. And although I think that a lot of what passes for quote-unquote politics in music is really just somebody complaining about whatever authority figure they're mad at right now, whether that's like cops or the president or teachers, like when the entire punk scene had like a temper tantrum in the 2000s when Bush won.
Rock Against Bush was a 2-album compilation release featuring punk bands against the re-election of President George W. Bush in 2004.
I think it's also done a very good job of raising awareness for some specific issues. Police brutality. That's something I became aware of in 1989 when I discovered NWA and Eazy-E.
Fuck the police and Red said it with authority.
Because as a white 6th grader from the suburbs of Seattle, I just literally had no idea that police brutality was an issue for anybody anywhere because, why would I? And then I heard "fuck the police" and I asked my dad about it. He was a corrections officer, and he explained to me that, yeah, actually it's a pretty serious issue. And then a few years later, Rage Against the Machine. They got stuff like Leonard Peltier and Mumia Abu-Jamal's cases in front of millions and millions of people on MTV and festivals. Or because of hardcore bands like Earth Crisis and Vegan Reich, I get into veganism and discovered things like Sea Shepherd and the ALF and Direct Action and colonialism and indigenous people's rights. A lot of people are just discovering the Columbus Day as genocide thing now, but I learned about it from this Earth Crisis song from 1993. Very ahead of its time.
By the sword, by treating that word lies.
And I would say all that is a good thing. We can agree or disagree on the particulars of any of those issues, but I think generally speaking, raising awareness of things that were previously unknown or ignored is a good thing because that leads to more discussion, which then hopefully leads to a solution. So if all that is so great, why am I bringing this up? Why am I making this video? Because the counterpoint to everything I just said is that musicians and entertainers have a very bad habit of, to put it bluntly, talking out of their ass about stuff that they're just wildly unqualified to speak on, especially in regards to like politics and business.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
At best, that makes them just annoying people that add to the already massive amount of just dumb noise on the internet. the cesspool that is Twitter. But at worst, it makes them the musical equivalent of your dumb uncle who starts like pointless online arguments and blindly shares fake news all the time. And I would argue that the way we have these conversations and the role of disinformation right now on social media is a serious problem with serious consequences.
DC police say this North Carolina man was inspired by a lie spread online to walk into this DC pizza restaurant with 2 guns Sunday.
So the question is, yes, musicians have played an important role in bringing certain issues to light, and that's awesome. But at what point is that outweighed by them also having this terrible habit of blurting out poorly informed, dumb shit that spreads false information and just kind of ratchets up all this like partisan tribalist anger that we're all feeling right now?
Hello, me. Meet the real me.
As an obvious example of what I mean, here is a doozy from Dave Mustaine. He said this in 2012 in Singapore, I think. Back in my country, my president is trying to pass a gun ban, he said. So he's staging all of these murders, like the Fast and the Furious thing down at the border in Aurora, Colorado, all the people that were killed there, and now all the beautiful people at the Sikh temple. Yes, he said that Obama staged a bunch of mass shootings. Now you might be saying, okay, that's pretty bad, but you picked an extreme example. Most musicians aren't like that. And fortunately, you're right. Although I have to say that this rap song that Alex Skolnick of Testament made about Trump might actually be worse.
Abomination, an epic fail, just like Bannon and Flynn. He belongs in jail. Trump sucks.
Alex is an absolute legend, an amazing musician who also seems like just a super cool guy that I'd probably really like to hang out with, but this is just embarrassing. And more to the point, it adds nothing productive to the discussion. There's nothing thoughtful here. It's just more like orange man bad, red team bad. And do we really need more of that right now? Like, is that actually gonna help anyone or anything? I don't think so. And just so you don't think I'm taking sides here, I would say the same thing about the new 5-Finger Death Punch video where they're making fun of Nancy Pelosi and like mask scolds.
Hey there, your majesty. Is there anyone above you?
All their fans are gonna pat him on the back and high five him and say how great it is. But again, I just don't think this like blue team bad stuff is helpful at all. All this is doing is fanning the flames of all this partisan anger. Although to be fair to musicians, Hollywood still has them beat as far as like brain dead partisan grandstanding masquerading as activism.
I'm gonna say one thing, fuck Trump.
Number one, just to be clear, I absolutely think that everybody can and should speak their mind about whatever they want. The marketplace of ideas is an amazing thing, so even putting out dumb ideas can actually sometimes be helpful in a weird way. For example, when Colin Kaepernick, who I think is a good guy, who has his heart in the right place, I think he's just kind of an uneducated person who's in over his head, and he made the unfortunate mistake of endorsing Fidel Castro, and but I think it actually ended up being good in some ways, because it made a lot of historians and Cubans come out and be like, actually, Castro is a horrible, oppressive dictator who's so awful that his people would rather throw themselves on like a makeshift boat into an ocean filled with sharks than live under him. So we probably don't want to lionize those guys. And I think that was a big learning moment for a lot of sports fans who probably never thought about this before.
The executions by firing squads are not only a necessity for the people of Cuba, but also an imposition of the people, he wrote.
With that said, I would encourage musicians or, really anybody to think twice before just blurting stuff out. For better or worse, your words and actions carry a lot of weight with your audience, and a lot of them will either consciously or unconsciously emulate the way you act. So personally, I would say, I don't think you're helping anybody if you pull a De Niro and go on one of these like angry other team bad rants.
It's our fucking money, not yours. We paid that in taxes for everything we do every fucking day.
And I definitely think you need to do some research on any kind of news or other article that you share, because you don't want to end up accidentally being that boomer uncle that shared fake news. Like when all those celebrities last year or whatever thought they were helping by sharing what they believed were pictures of the Amazon rainforest burning, but then it turned out those were pictures from years ago and sometimes not even of the Amazon. And that's really unfortunate because deforestation is a serious issue. I mean, I think climate change is the single most important issue in the history of humanity ever, because if we don't get that right, we're all fucking dead. And that's why this is such a problem, because when you share fake information and then have to walk it back, you destroy the credibility of the very cause that you're trying to help.
What you may not realize is that fake news is your fault.
And also remember that it's okay to say, you know what, I don't really know enough to have an opinion on this topic. And number two, by the same token, I think it's on us as the fans to use a little bit more critical thinking. First of all, consider the source. The fact that somebody is the drummer in a cool band does not mean that their opinion on anything else should carry any kind of special weight. Think about this for a minute. How many interviews have you read where somebody in a band like almost bragged about how badly they did in high school? Musicians, generally speaking, are honestly not super educated people. We hold up Tom Morello as an example of like this really educated guy. And with all due respect to him, he's certainly a smart guy, but like he has an undergrad degree in poli-sci. Nor do they tend to have a lot of relevant professional experience outside of music for the most part. It's not like the drummer for A Skylit Drive was a chemical engineer for Procter & Gamble before he joined the band. Although I think it'd be kind of cool if somebody in the comments was like, actually he was.
You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg.
Now, do you have to have a formal education or a lot of professional experience to have a valid opinion on something? No, absolutely not. And I think that's especially true when it comes to politics, because that would mean that only politicians are allowed to talk about politics, and fuck that, because fuck politicians. But with that said, when it comes to very complex and technical topics like, say, the healthcare system, or whether Amazon and Google should be subject to antitrust regulations, should we unwind the Instagram acquisition, I'm probably going to listen to people who spent their careers working in that field rather than Dave Mustaine, who spent his career playing guitar. I mean, think about if you turn the tables. How much weight would you put on, say, Ted Cruz or Kamala Harris's views on music? Although actually, now that I think about it, I would love to see that. Like Ted Cruz tweeting, "Who mixed the new Corey Taylor single? That snare sounds like shit." Or Kamala Harris making a 29-minute webcam rant about how gent is not a valid subgenre. Now it's possible that Ted Cruz is actually super knowledgeable about pop punk, and it's possible that your favorite musician is actually super knowledgeable about the nuances of the federal defense budget. But I'd say that both of those things are pretty unlikely, and you should keep that in mind when they're talking.
All those morons saying that communism is the same as welfare, you can go leave.
And lastly, one of the big questions that's been asked a lot lately is, do musicians or other public figures have an obligation to use their platform to talk about politics? I would say no, they don't. I think, on balance, it's actually better to say nothing at all than to just spout off a bunch of loudmouth, poorly informed, angry rants and think that somehow you're helping, when really you're just that boomer aunt or uncle, you just have a bigger audience. What I am saying here is, by all means, speak up. If you have something informative, if you have any kind of specific solution that you're proposing, I love seeing that from artists. As one example of, I think, the right thing to do, like I mentioned earlier, Rage Against the Machine with People of the Sun, what they were talking about there was colonialism of Central and South America, the Aztecs and the Mayans and all that stuff, which in 1994, I think probably 0% of their audience had ever even thought about. I mean, even now, probably most people have never considered that that's why people there speak Spanish. Bringing something specific like that to the awareness of an audience who had never considered it before is awesome. But the directionless anger, the name calling, just the partisan bickering, that is what I've had enough of. Now, there's probably some of you that are thinking that that's kind of a privileged thing to say. Like, sure, you don't have to think about politics. You have that luxury, but some people have to live this stuff every day. They don't have the option of just ignoring it. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. I think it's true and it sucks. For example, FGM affects hundreds of millions of women on the other side of the planet, and pretty much nobody in America cares or is even aware of it because they don't have to be aware. It doesn't affect them, and so it might as well just not exist.
If it doesn't affect you, it doesn't exist.
So I think that that is somewhat true, but what's the answer to that? I mean, we can't all talk about every issue all the time, right? For one, it would be impossible to have an informed opinion on all of that stuff, and I don't think it would be helpful to just like blindly retweet stuff. If anything, that just adds noise and drowns out the people who are really seriously knowledgeable and dedicated to working on these things. Don't just talk to talk. If you have some sort of specific personal or professional insight to add to this that you think might actually be helpful, then by all means say something. You should speak up. This is why I talk about communism, because it's affected my family.
Ho Chi Minh killed about 2 million Vietnamese. We don't want the communist flag hanging here. We're looking for freedom. We come here.
So to be clear, I'm definitely not saying like, fuck it, man, just ignore politics. Like, you don't have to give a shit. That's somebody else's problem. That would be a super gross position to take, and I probably haven't been clear about that in the past. I also think it can be very disingenuous when people say like, use your platform, because typically what they mean is use your platform to express opinions that I agree with, which is bullshit. They don't actually want you to express your own ideas. They want you to be a soldier for their cause.
If you want to be one of the nonconformists, all you have to do is dress just like us and listen to the same music we do.
So to wrap things up, the way that I feel about the main question in this video of should musicians talk about politics is yes, if you're a musician and you want to talk about politics, do it, especially if you have some sort of particular personal or professional insight to add. But I would also say to the audience, use some critical thinking here. Don't just blindly accept somebody's ideas on politics or social issues just because they're in a band you like or they have a YouTube channel that you like or whatever, especially when it comes to these very complex or technical topics where the musician almost definitely doesn't have a lot of subject matter expertise and is probably talking out of their ass. And artists, please, for the sake of your own dignity and everybody else's sanity, please do not be the scene equivalent of the dumb Facebook aunt or uncle putting out poorly informed bad takes on everything and fake news and ranting about how the other team is bad. Please just take a little bit of time to ask yourself, like, A, do I actually have enough information to have a good opinion on this thing? And B, is putting this thing out there actually gonna help? Or should I maybe just sit this one out? So yes, we all can and should care, and I think we all have an obligation to do what we can to solve all the tough problems out there that we're dealing with. But don't make the mistake of thinking that just ranting on social media or in your lyrics counts as doing something.
Someone should do something. We gotta do something.
All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, I would love to hear what you think in the comments. I can see that this one might have the potential to get a little bit spicy, so I would ask that you please keep it civil. Let's prove to the world that you can have a constructive, thoughtful dialogue. And before I let you go, I would like to thank everybody who supports us on Patreon, especially those who support at the True Cult level or above. It is because of your support that we're able to do a lot of things. For example, the podcast. It's because of you guys that is able to hire a producer and editor who makes the whole thing happen. She's amazing. So thank you very much for your support. If you are interested in supporting us on Patreon, there's a link in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.